The first explosion ripped the sky apart, a MiG-29 spiraling down in flames, molten debris raining over the desert. 5 more fighter jets roared in, certain they'd end the lone Apache within seconds. Inside the cockpit, Cassandra Viper Holt smiled. "Your mistake," she said over the open channel, "was thinking I'd run." What followed wasn't a fight, it was a hunt, and the hunter wasn't the jets. How can a helicopter pilot outfly and outgun the deadliest aircraft in the region? What secret training turned her into the nightmare they never saw coming? Every move she made turned the sky into a killing ground. This is Veteran Biker. Comment 1 if you're new, 2 if you've been with us, 3 if you ride with us every week. Like, subscribe, and stay to the end. The midday sun scorched the horizon, turning the desert's jagged ridges into a shimmering mirage. Far below, in the labyrinth of sandstone valleys near the Jordan-Syria border, 6 American operators, call sign Falcon 7, were pinned down, pressed against rocks barely thick enough to stop the rounds hammering their position. Dust plumes rose where bullets chewed into the cliff face, the air vibrating with the deep, steady chatter of heavy machine guns. Above them, a lone shadow swept across the terrain, a sleek, predatory silhouette that moved with deliberate control. The R-64 Apache was never designed to be subtle at close range, but today its presence was both shield and warning. Cassandra Viper Holt sat in the pilot's seat, her left hand light on the collective, right hand resting on the cyclic, every muscle attuned to the helicopter's slight tremors. Her headset crackled with the strained voice of the ground team leader. "Viper, we're low on ammo. 2 down, 4 holding. Hostiles are pushing from the north and east." She didn't answer right away. Her gaze was fixed on the multifunction display where a sweep of green arcs had just appeared. 6 inbound radar contacts. They were moving fast, converging in a wedge formation from high altitude. A cold prickle ran along her neck, not from fear, but from recognition. Those weren't transport helicopters or slow-moving gunships. They were fighters, fast, lethal, and unchallenged in this theater. A calm but firm voice broke in over the command net. "Viper, this is Overlord. You have multiple enemy air assets closing on your position. Abort mission and return to base. I say again, disengage immediately." Cassandra's jaw tightened. "Negative, Overlord. Falcon 7 is still in contact. You're an attack helicopter, not an air-to-air platform. 6 fighters against you isn't a fight, it's suicide." She kept her eyes on the radar traces. They were climbing out of the horizon and would be within visual range in under 2 minutes. Her mind was already running the numbers, calculating their likely approach angles and weapon envelopes. "Understood, Overlord," she replied evenly, "but leaving them here is the real suicide. I'm staying." The channel went silent for a beat too long. Then, reluctantly, "Your call, Viper. God help you." In the quiet that followed, she reached for the small photograph clipped inside the cockpit canopy. It was old, edges frayed, colors fading, but the image was sharp in her mind. Her father, Marcus Hawk Holt, leaning against an R-1 Cobra, his flight suit streaked with grease and sand, grinning like a man who lived exactly where he belonged. He had been the first to tell her that a helicopter could be more than a ground support platform. In the right hands, it could be a hunter in the skies. Now those lessons were about to be tested. She rolled the Apache into a slow bank, skimming the edge of a ridgeline, keeping her profile low against the rock to mask her infrared signature. On her tactical map, the fighters split into 2 elements, 3 angling from the northeast, 3 from the southwest. Textbook pincer movement. The open channel crackled again, this time with a voice she didn't recognize, accented and smug. "We see you, little bird. This will be quick." A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, though her eyes stayed locked on the data feed. She didn't need to reply. Let them talk. Every second they spent underestimating her was another second she could use. Below, Falcon 7 shifted position. Through the Apache's targeting pod, she caught glimpses of them crawling to a deeper depression in the valley floor, dragging their wounded through clouds of ochre dust. A burst of tracer fire from an enemy technical streaked overhead, missing them by inches. Cassandra keyed the intercom to her co-pilot gunner in the front seat, Warrant Officer Kyle Mercer. We're going to have company. Load 2 Stingers on ready. Hellfires on deck. Keep the cannon cold until I call it. Copy that, Mercer replied, his tone clipped but steady. The first flicker of sunlight off metal announced the fighters before their engines reached audible range. Sleek shapes darted above the horizon, closing fast, MiG-29s in the lead, Su-27 seconds flanking behind. The noise built from a distant roar into a pressure in the chest, the kind that made lesser pilots twitch on the controls. Cassandra kept her grip loose, letting the helicopter respond fluidly to the wind shear rolling down from the ridges. At 8 miles, the lead MiG dipped slightly, nose dropping toward her position. He was lining up for a high-speed gun pass, counting on her to do what every helicopter pilot was trained to do, duck behind cover and wait for the danger to pass. Instead, she did the opposite. She climbed. The Apache rose along the leeward side of a sandstone bluff, out of sight until the last possible moment. When she crested the ridge, the MiG was already committed, its speed too high for a sudden brake. Fox 1, she said, almost conversationally, and thumbed the trigger. A Hellfire missile streaked out, its smoke trail curling against the blue. It struck just ahead of the cockpit, shearing the fighter in half. A flower of fire bloomed in the sky, petals of molten alloy tumbling earthward. The radio erupted with overlapping voices, shouted questions, disbelief. Mercer laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. That's one. But Cassandra wasn't celebrating. The remaining 5 were tightening formation, shock giving way to anger. She dipped the nose and dropped altitude, retreating into the canyon's twists, letting the terrain break their radar locks. Falcon 7, she called to the ground team. Hold your position. Air cover is engaging. We just saw that, Viper. Holy hell, came the reply, ragged with adrenaline. She swung the Apache into a hard right, climbing again to peek over the ridgeline. Through the targeting optics, she watched the Su-27 pair separate from the MiGs, angling to box her in. Mercer's voice was tight in her ear. They're trying to split us. Good, she said. Load Stingers. The first Sukhoi swept in from her left, sun flashing off its canopy. Cassandra pulled the Apache into a descending spiral, cutting across the fighter's trajectory. The world blurred, sky and rock trading places, then steadied as she leveled beneath his flight path. The Stinger locked with a growl in her headset. Fox 2. The missile leapt skyward, disappearing into the Sukhoi's exhaust plume. The explosion was muffled by altitude, but the black smoke and spinning debris told the story. The second Su-27 jerked into a brake turn, trying to roll away and climb. Cassandra had already anticipated the escape vector. She nudged the cyclic, sliding the Apache laterally in a move no fixed wing could match, and loosed her second Stinger. Another flare of light, another falling shadow. On the open channel, a panicked voice shouted in a language she didn't speak, but the fear was universal. The remaining MiG pilots regrouped, no longer predators but wary shapes in the sun. From the ground, Falcon 7 Fleet's leader came back on comms. Viper, we're watching the impossible up here. She didn't answer. Her focus was on the moving dots still painting her display. They were rethinking their approach, and that was exactly what she needed. High above, the sun caught the Apache's rotor tips, turning them into scythes of silver. In that light, the helicopter seemed less like a machine and more like a living thing, patient, coiled, and ready to strike again. Cassandra kept her breathing steady, eyes moving between the sensor displays and the jagged terrain outside the canopies. The enemy hadn't broken off. They were repositioning, trying to box her into a kill zone. "They'll come from high," she muttered to herself. "Force me to pull up where I can't hide." Mercer glanced back at her in the mirror above the console. "What's the plan?" "We don't give them the high ground. We take it." She shoved the collective forward, letting the Apache sink low into the shadow of a canyon wall, then pulled up sharply, climbing along the sloping rock as if it were a ramp. The sudden maneuver bled her forward speed but gained her precious altitude relative to the approaching MiGs. The first one swept into view, banking hard to line up a shot. Cassandra rolled the helicopter just enough to let the sun flare across her canopy, momentarily dazzling the fighter pilot. In that blink of hesitation, she fired a burst from the 30mm chain gun, the tracers stitching across the MiG's fuselage. Armor-piercing rounds ripped through the engine bay. The fighter lurched sideways, trailing a smoke plume as it dropped toward the desert. Mercer's voice was low but electric. 3 down. The open channel was silent now. No taunts, no confidence, just the hum of strained comms between the remaining pilots. "They're spooked," Cassandra said. "That's when they're dangerous. They'll get creative." She swung the Apache back toward Falcon 7's position, dropping low to avoid presenting a steady radar return. Through the targeting pod, she caught glimpses of the firefight still raging on the valley floor. The special operators were dug in, exchanging controlled bursts with advancing technicals. Their discipline impressed her. Most units would have panicked by now. One of the MiGs broke from the others, circling wide to her rear. She recognized the tactic, a high-speed pass from 6 o'clock, relying on momentum to punch through before she could react. But she had been expecting exactly this. "Kyle," she said evenly, "switch to manual gun control. On my mark." The moment the MiG committed to its run, Cassandra yanked the cyclic hard, pivoting the Apache's nose around in a brutal flat turn that only a helicopter could pull off. The G-force pressed her into the seat, but the sight picture in her HUD snapped into perfect alignment, nose to nose with a jet coming in far too fast to evade. "Mark!" Mercer squeezed the trigger. The chain gun roared, a thunderous vibration through the cockpit as round after round tore into the MiG's forward fuselage. The canopy shattered, the aircraft buckled midair, then vanished in a blossom of flame. Static hissed over the open channel, followed by a single clipped phrase in the enemy's tongue. Whatever it meant, the tone was enough to tell her the last 2 fighters were reconsidering their odds. "They'll either run or try something desperate," Cassandra said. "Which would you prefer?" Mercer asked. She didn't answer because the choice wasn't theirs to make. The 2 remaining blips on her scope split apart, one climbing into the glare of the sun, the other skimming low along the valley rim. It was a coordinated move, high-low trap. If she chased one, the other would strike from the blind side. Cassandra picked the low flyer. She darted forward, hugging the canyon shadow, keeping just enough speed to close the gap without giving the high MiG a clean angle. The enemy below jinked left, then right, trying to shake her. Mercer tracked him through the sight. "He's nervous. You've got him thinking about you, not the shot. That's the idea." She waited until the MiG tried to pull up for altitude, then eased the Apache into a shallow climb beneath his tail. Her finger hovered over the Hellfire trigger. At this range, the lock tone was instant. Fox 1. The missile surged away, bridging the gap in seconds. Impact came with a sharp flash, the fighter disintegrating into a rain of fragments that sparkled briefly in the sunlight before vanishing into the canyon depths. "One left," Mercer said. The final MiG was still high above, perhaps hoping his wingman would distract her long enough for a clean missile shot. But now he was alone, and altitude was no longer an advantage. Cassandra had terrain, speed, and momentum on her side. She banked toward a jagged outcrop, climbing just enough to bring herself level with the plateau. The MiG dove, either out of frustration or sheer necessity, his contrail slashing the sky. "Looks like he's coming for a pass," Mercer warned. "Let him." She throttled back slightly, letting the Apache drift toward the cliff edge. At the last second, she rolled right, slipping behind the outcrop, so the MiG had to guess her position. By the time he realized his error, she had already pulled up behind him. The chain gun spoke again, concise bursts this time, chewing through his wing root. The MiG lurched sideways, clipped the canyon wall, and disintegrated into an expanding cloud of dust and fire. Silence filled the comm-net. No more enemy chatter, no radar contacts. The airspace was hers. Cassandra let the Apache settle into a wide orbit over Falcon 7. On the valley floor, the special operators were still in the fight, but the pressure had eased. Without air cover, the enemy ground forces were hesitant to push forward. "Falcon 7, this is Viper. Air threat eliminated. I'm on station for close support." The reply came back with a mix of disbelief and relief. "Viper, we just saw 6 jets go down. I don't know what to say, except you've bought us our ticket out." She didn't smile, not yet. The mission wasn't over. The enemy on the ground still outnumbered the Americans, and they weren't going to give up just because the sky was clear. "Let's finish this," she told Mercer. The Apache rolled into its next dive, guns and missiles ready. The hunt had changed shape, but it wasn't done. The rotor beat folded into the wind like a steady drumline as the Apache arced wide over the valley. Down below, Falcon 7 squeezed into a slit of shadow between broken slabs of sandstone, the kind of natural trench carved by 1,000 flash floods and now serving as a brittle lifeline. Their muzzle flashes were brief and disciplined, returning fire only when a hostile silhouette exposed itself over the lip of rock. Trucks with mounted guns crawled through the dust on the far side of the basin, trying to angle their barrels into that narrow pocket and flush the Americans out with sheer volume. Cassandra eased the nose and let the helicopter slide into a curving descent. Not a dramatic dive, but a predatory glide that kept her unpredictable. The sky had gone glass clear after the shock of the air duel. Heat shimmer bent the horizon into invisible waves. On the tactical display, the enemy ground picture painted itself in messy strokes, clusters of heat, sporadic radio pings, a few encrypted bursts she couldn't read but understood well enough. Rally, push, finish the job while the ground was still theirs. "On station for guns," she said, voice even. "Talk me on." "Falcon 7 actual came back clipped and fast," referenced the gashed ridge north of smoke. "2 technicals in line. We can mark with red." "Hold the flare," Cassandra said. "I've got them through the nose sensor. Shapes resolved. 2 pickup trucks nose to tail behind a low berm, shields welded in front of heavy weapons, dust caked into every crease, heat washed off their engines in wobbly halos. The gunners were steel-nerved or frightened senseless. Either way, they were staying up in the mounts to keep pressure on the trench. Kyle, short burst, forward gun, center truck. Mercer's acknowledgement was a soft click. The sight reticle kissed the lead vehicle's hood, then walked across the windshield. Cassandra squeezed the trigger and felt the chain gun's vibration roll up through the frame. The stream of rounds cut the truck in half. The gunner's shield folded like cardboard. The second pickup jerked backward and tried to reverse. She tilted the nose a hair and drew a diagonal line from headlight to cab. The arc of tracers ended in sparks and a sudden bloom of flame as the fuel feed tore open. "Guns off," she said. "Clear right, rolling left." A rocket-propelled grenade streaked out of scrub to her 9 o'clock and spent itself on bare rock, the explosion echoing off the basin. She punched the pedals and slid sideways across the bowl to make a small target, then climbed just enough to peek over the opposite ridge. A handful of fighters were huddled behind a cluster of boulders, one shouldering another tube, trying to swing the sight picture onto a moving helicopter. She didn't give him the chance. A 3-round burst knocked dust off the stone, then the fourth ate the tube and the shooter with it. The rest scattered, small figures scrambling like startled lizards. "Falcon 7, she called. "Pressure on your north is easing." "I'm seeing movement east, near the dry arroyo." "Copy," the leader said. "We've got 2 wounded, both stable for the moment. Ammo is down to mags and a dream. Then we'll make noise for you." She set a wide orbit and ran her thumb across the weapon select. The Hellfires were there, silent and patient, but she wanted the cannon's conversation first. Show of presence, controlled violence, carve room around the trench so her people could breathe. She painted a line across the eastern approach, chewing up a path just ahead of where enemy boots would need to cross if they wanted to close. It was not a spray. Each press had intent, snipping at angles, flattening out cover that would become a problem in 3 minutes if left alone. Static crackled. Overlord returned to the net, a different tone now, measured admiration, trying hard not to sound like awe. "Viper, confirm your air picture." "Clean," she said. "No fast movers. I own the bowl. Victor." "A beat. Be advised, we've got friendly armor stepping off from the south, 20 minutes minimum. Your window is yours to manage." 20 is a lifetime down here," Mercer muttered. "Then we teach it to crawl," Cassandra replied. She slid lower until the rotorwash lifted gritty sheets from the desert floor, then trimmed to a hover behind a sawtooth ridge. The Apache didn't love lingering in place. Helicopters were happiest when moving. But every rule had exceptions, and this was one. Hold tight, force them to commit, reposition as soon as they do. A burst of machine gun fire raked the stone to her right, tracing a path toward where she'd been a second earlier. She drifted 2 meters left and returned 3 precise pulses, and the gun fell quiet. "Viper, be advised," Falcon 7 said. "We've picked up chatter about a tube-fed anti-air system, unknown make, possibly tracked." That turned the air a degree colder. Cassandra pictured the possibilities. An old 4-barrel with radar teeth, a shoulder-launched pair multiplied into a half-dozen tubes on a flatbed, or worse, a self-propelled relic kept alive with baling wire and prayer. Even antique systems could ruin a day if you flew lazy. "Copy all," she said. "We'll find it before it finds me." She nudged the Apache east and then south, letting the nose camera sweep along the ash-gray fault lines for a shape that didn't belong. Trucks were easy. Improvised launchers were less so. Then she saw it, a squat profile tucked into a deviant crease in the terrain, angled low with its barrels depressed, masked by a tarp dyed desert brown. The barrels themselves had a distinct geometry, 4 eyes in a square, old but not harmless. "Kyle, mark that position," she said. "Distance 700. We're not waking it up. Hellfire remote designation. We'll keep our silhouette low." "Designator hot," he said. She didn't roll in. She barely climbed. The missile slipped away like a thrown spear, the motor igniting into a quiet flare, guidance whispering in the frame. Through the monochrome window of the sensor, she watched the square of barrels flinch, the tarp flick back, the crew inside realizing too late that the sky had already made its choice. The impact punched the mount into an ungainly hop. The second pop turned the tarpaulin into a shredded flag. When the smoke cleared, the threat was a pile of twisted limbs and iron. "Threat neutralized," Mercer said. "Good. Keep hunting." She allowed herself one heartbeat of relief. No more. Below, on the valley floor, a thin column of friendly smoke blossomed near the trench. Violet dye wafting into the hot wind. Not a signal for her, a marker to tell any approaching ground vehicle where not to drive. Someone from Falcon 7 was thinking several moves ahead, standard for elite teams, but still comforting to see in the middle of chaos. "Status?" Cassandra asked them, still holding. "North side is quieter. East is probing. We'll need a break to move. Can you cut us a corridor?" She glanced at the map in her head, overlaying it on the real geometry beyond the glass. The trench pointed toward a drainage line that meandered south by southwest, out of their current kill zone but not free of risk. The enemy had stacked obstacles at the obvious exits. The trick was to make the dangerous path look safe and the safe path look like a mistake. "I can do one better," she said. "I'll make them step back." She lifted out of the hover and accelerated toward the east rim, not in a straight run but in a shallow S, forcing the ground gunners to chase her moves. She let one of them catch a sliver of her belly, inviting a volley, then vanished behind a broken spine of rock. The moment their tracers arced high, she popped up where the angle made no sense and raked the ridgeline from above, unthreading the cover they'd prepared. The sound was a rattling hammer, raw, unambiguous, a language men under pressure understood instinctively. On the ground, fighters tumbled away in irregular waves. Some held their positions a second too long, and those were the ones who stopped moving first. Mercer broke the rhythm. Movement in the depression west of the trench. 5 figures. Looks like a small assault team trying to backdoor Falcon 7. "I see them." Cassandra slid the nose, shimmied the airframe into the wind to keep the gun stable, and bit off a narrow swath that cut across their path without spraying too far forward. The 5 figures flattened, then scrambled back the way they'd come, leaving a pair who wouldn't stand again. "Falcon 7, your west is clear for 1 minute," she said. "If you're going to shift, now is the time." "2 litters moving," came the reply. "We're bound south on your mark." She didn't give a countdown. She made the mark. The chain gun roared again, metronomic and ruthless, singing along the lip of a wash that enemy shooters would have to cross to get an angle. The rounds turned that lip into a curtain no one wanted to pass through. Falcon 7 moved, 2 by 2. The bearers hunched over their wounded, every step calculated, every pause a promise that the next would be shorter. A stray anti-tank rocket bloomed to the south, miles offline. Nervous hands, Cassandra thought. The enemy had felt invincible 5 minutes earlier. Now they were guessing. Guesses were dangerous, but they were also brittle. The radio cracked with a different voice, one of Falcon 7's medics, breathy with effort. "Viper! Litter 2 is snagging. Terrain is chewing the stretcher. We need 30 seconds with no rounds near us." "You'll get 60, she said, and pulled the Apache into a shallow climb that gave her eyes on every approach lane. The next minute was all restraint, a surgeon's minute. She put short, sharp bursts where heads poked out and nowhere else. It took a different kind of control to not shoot the tempting silhouettes dancing at the edge of the wash. It took trust in the team below to move when they needed to, without her drawing a line of fire too near their path. At exactly the point where her instincts told her to throw more lead, she forced her hand still. "Moving," the medic called. "Clear again. Copy." They reached the next fold of ground. The trench was now a memory behind them. Ahead lay the long tongue of the drainage channel that would, if the world cooperated, funnel them toward the friendlies crawling up from the south. The channel was exposed from the west in 2 places where the rock opened like broken teeth. That was where the enemy would try to pinch. Cassandra beat them to it. "Hellfire," she said, not because she needed to say it, Mercer had already switched, but because naming the choice can steady a hand when the picture gets crowded. She cued 2 missiles in series at the mouths of those gaps. She didn't need direct hits, she needed chaos, rockfall, confusion. The twin strikes walked the edge of the drainage line with precise violence, collapsing ledges into a dusty cascade that clogged the pinch points with jagged stone. Anyone trying to charge through would be forced to climb, and climbers made easy math for a gun. On the net, Overlord's tone returned, now tinted with decision. "Viper! Armor! is at 15 mics. We're pushing recon drones overhead to watch your south, seeing enemy vehicles repositioning 2 clicks out, maybe setting for a blocking move. Let them set, Cassandra said. They'll be late. Mercer leaned into the scope. Contact, East Ridge, fresh barrel. That's a second anti-air mount. They hit it well. Position, northeast of the collapsed outcrop. Looks wheeled, crew exposed. She thought of the shredded tarp on the earlier piece and imagined the urgency in the crew chief's voice when he told his men to hurry the next one into action. Old machine, green crew. Those were the ones who made fatal timing errors. We'll take it the same way, she said, but faster. Laser on. The second Hellfire slid away. It kissed the mount behind the operator's seat. The blast removed the crew's voices from the battlefield and left the carriage twisted into a shape that wouldn't threaten anyone again. Cassandra didn't watch it burn. She rolled left and dropped another burst on a patch of scrub where 3 targets were trying to thread toward the drainage channel under cover of the smoke. They fell like cut wires. Falcon 7, status, both litters intact. We're at the dogleg in the drainage. We can move on our own for the next 70 meters if you keep the lip quiet. I will. She kept it quiet. She kept everything quiet except the places that needed to be loud, the berms that had to be shaved, the shadows that hid a muzzle flash, the ridge that promised to become a sniper's roost. Each short burst was punctuation, not prose. Between them, the sound of the valley returned in fractured pieces, wind worrying the scrub, gravel ticking down a slope, the distant cough of an engine trying to start after too many hours in grit. A thought surfaced, unbidden, and she didn't push it away. Her father squinting at an old VHS war film, pausing it with a thumbprint and asking her what she noticed in the corner of. The frame, never the obvious explosion, always the overlooked reflection in a window that gave away where the next threat would come from. See the thing that tells you other things. She smiled without meaning to and checked the reflections in her own cockpit glass. A tiny shimmer on rock that didn't match the sun's angle. A lens. Sniper. West buttress, she said. Single. Poor hide but good angle. Mercer had him in the view before the sentence finished. The Apache's cannon coughed twice, stone dust took the place where the man had been, and then there was only a rifle clattering somewhere out of sight. "Thank you," Falcon 7's leader said, and there was a warmth there that hadn't been present earlier. Not gratitude for killing, gratitude for seeing. They made the bend in the drainage and slid into a wider cut where the floor smoothed out into hardpan. It would be easier to run here. It would also be easier to be seen. Cassandra adjusted her orbit to favor the side that shielded them from the longest lines of sight. A truck blundered into the north entrance and tried to turn its nose across the channel to block it. She shaved off the front axle with a diagonal burst, and the vehicle sagged like a gutted animal, steam pouring from its hood. The men inside made the bad choice to get out. She didn't need to finish the sentence. "Overlord, confirm friendlies from south," she said. Affirm. Call sign Saber approaching the outer lip. They will not have line on you for 3 mics. Keep your corridor. I've got them. She kept it by making it expensive to cross. The chain gun sang in short stanzas, each line placed to discourage bravery and punish stubbornness. A man bolted from a scrub hollow and flung his rifle aside, hands up, stumbling toward the drainage in a panic. Cassandra lifted her thumb off the trigger and let him pass. He would not help his side now, the ones who remained crouched behind stones and thought about living through the hour. "Viper," Mercer said. "East. New heat signature. Heavy. That's not a truck." She squinted at the screen. The silhouette trudging through the dust toward the far side of the channel rode lower and broader than a pickup. Boxy turret, block tracks, an armored hull with a small cannon and a laughable idea of modern optics. But armor was armor. The shell didn't care if it was guided by a relic. Range, 1300 and closing. Hellfire. Top attack. He didn't need instruction. The lock tone came quick and clean. She held the nose steady, kept her own silhouette in the clutter, then touched the release. The missile arced and vanished into the sun, then came down like a judge's gavel. The armored car tried to turn the wrong way, instinct instead of training, and the warhead punished the mistake. The turret jumped, landed sideways, and slid into a small incline, where it coughed once and stilled. Smoke curled from the seams. "Armor down," Mercer said. "Keep your eyes on the flanks. They'll try infantry rush." They did. It lasted 6 seconds. After that, no one wanted to be the hero for a cause that had just lost its air, its teeth, and its nerve. "Viper," Overlord said, "Saber is at your 12. They're popping blue smoke. Confirm, you see." She lifted a fraction higher and saw the ribbon of blue unfurling along the southern lip, followed by the gleam of friendly vehicles cresting the low ridge like beasts easing into a watering hole. Infantry fanned out behind armor, making themselves large, owning space. Her window was closing, but not in a bad way. Relief had a shape and a timetable, and the seconds began to feel less like a drought and more like the first drops of rain. "Falcon 7, your ride's here," she said. "2 more bends and you're kissing Saber's footprint." "Copy," the leader said. The voice sounded different, lighter by a degree that only those who had been under rock and gunfire for an hour could recognize. Cassandra backed her orbit, widening out to keep the whole picture on the glass. She didn't want to get so close now that she cluttered Saber's field. She didn't want to be so far that a surprise could bloom without her seeing it. Balance, always balance. A tiny thread of motion snagged her attention near the north rim. An individual in a white shirt moving with purpose toward a lump of canvas. Not a gun, a radio pack, the kind that could make a new decision appear in the sky if someone on the other end of the net answered the call. "Kyle, on me," she said. "Northeast point, white shirt. He's the one calling angles." She walked the gun in from his left, close enough to lift a warning cloud, far enough to allow an option. He chose wrong. He ran to the radio. The line of rounds finished what his choice had begun. The canvas kicked once and lay still. The invisible thread that could have tugged the battle back into uncertainty went slack. "Saber has your team," Overlord reported, and the relief in his tone wasn't couched in protocol this time. "We're reading friendly signatures converged. Airspace remains clear." Cassandra let breath she didn't know she was holding unspooled from her chest. The landscape softened by a degree, not because anything in the desert had changed, but because what mattered on it had. 6 men alive where 6 bodies might have been, a corridor carved out of hostility and stubborn stone. "Viper," Falcon 7's leader said, "we owe you 6 beers and our next 10 birthdays." "Save it," she said, a smile in her voice for the first time today. "You're not done until your wheel's up." Mercer chuckled softly. "They're going to tell stories about this. They always tell stories," she said, eyes scanning the ridgelines one more time. "Make sure the story ends with everyone boarding." She stayed on station as Saber's vehicles swallowed Falcon 7 into their protective geometry and began the slow roll back toward the south, the kind of movement that looks comfortable from a distance and feels like walking on a tightrope when you're inside it. She snipped at the edges where curiosity tried to become boldness. She spent the last of the moments she had with precision. Not because she'd run out of ammunition, the bins were still healthy, but because it was a personal rule: never spend more violence than the mission requires. A new voice slid into the channel, quiet, authoritative. "Saber Actual. Viper, this is Saber. We appreciate the umbrella. You have a standing invitation to our table if you ever pass our way." "Noted," she said. She meant it. Ground units who trusted the roof over their heads had a particular generosity. "Overlord to Viper," Command added. "Business returning but softer around the edges. RTB at your discretion. Debrief will be hot wash. We'd like your cockpit footage pulled as soon as you hit the pad." "Copy," she said, then switched nets and checked once more with Falcon 7. "You good?" A chorus rose, laughter, curses at the sun, a medic calling a pulse, the team leader binding it all into one verdict. "We're good, Viper. Damn good." She climbed, the valley unfolding beneath the Apache like a map freshly drawn. Heat shimmered over the sandstone, the air sharpening as they rose. In the corner of her eye, the photo clipped to the canopy brushed the plexi. She didn't touch it, just carried its grin, and the sound of 6 living voices below. "Set course," she told Mercer. "Already rolling," he said, tapping the recorder. "Think they'll believe the jets? They'll believe the footage, or the men on the ground." They turned south, ridges flattening into pale scrub and dark stone. The world stayed dangerous. She'd simply bought this hour. A crosswind nudged the frame. She trimmed it out without thought. Far ahead, hangars shimmered in the heat. Command's voice came softer now. "Viper. The right people are paying attention." Roger. There'd be time later for cooled rooms and questions. For now, she flew, glanced once more at the basin scored with tracks, and banked in quiet promise, "If you call again, I will answer." The southern corridor brought routine back to the radio. Mercer exhaled fully. She kept her posture until the runway edged into view. Her father's voice lingered. "Fly it all the way down." When the skids kissed the pad and the engine's grip eased, she knew this victory wasn't luck. It was discipline, skill, and the refusal to let a machine define her limits. In a desert that tried to erase 6 names, an Apache had written them back, letter by letter, round by round. Cassandra Viper Holt pulled her helmet free, the heat rushing her skin, the sun bright against the canopy. Somewhere on the flight line, a crew chief looked up, squinting, already hearing rumors faster than any official brief could move. She let the cockpit's old plastic smell and hot metal sink in for a moment, then reached for the recorder cartridge and unseated it with a practiced twist. "Let's go tell them what they think is impossible," she said. Mercer's grin was all answer she needed. They stepped down into the blast of afternoon, and the world, for a breath, was just noise and light, and the hard, gratifying certainty of having been exactly where they were needed. The hangar doors swallowed the Apache in shadow, the outside glare sliding off its armor as if the day itself had no claim here. Cassandra shut down the systems in sequence, each click and whine another step back from the raw immediacy of combat. The rotor blades slowed overhead, their deep pulse fading into the background hum of generators and distant tools. On the tarmac, ground crews moved with a quiet urgency. A few faces turned to watch her climb down. Word of the 6 aircraft kill had already outrun the returning rotor wash. Warrant Officer Mercer stepped off beside her, helmet tucked under one arm, the set of his jaw somewhere between exhaustion and the lingering charge of adrenaline. Colonel Ortega was waiting near the maintenance bay, hands clasped behind his back, eyes narrowing slightly in the dim light. He didn't speak until Cassandra reached him. "You're going to need to walk me through every second of that mission," he said, voice low enough to keep the gathering personnel from hearing more than his tone. "But first, tell me, are they all alive?" "They're with Sabre Company now, en route to Fob Bravo. 6 for 6. A faint exhale passed between Ortega's teeth, the smallest acknowledgement of relief. Then his expression reset into command. "Debrief in 20 minutes. Bring your footage." Inside the ready room, the air smelled faintly of coffee left too long on a hot plate. Cassandra slotted the recorder cartridge into the briefing console, the display coming alive with a frozen image of the basin, ridges, heat bloom, the jagged white icons of enemy aircraft moments before the fight began. A few officers clustered in, some from aviation, others wearing ground force patches. She recognized one, Captain Lawson, an F-16 driver with more than 200 sorties to his name. His folded arms and steady gaze said he wasn't here for spectacle. He was here to understand. The playback started without commentary. The room filled with the digital thump of cannon fire, the sharp spikes of missile launches, and the breathless exchanges over radio. They watched the first MiG break apart, the pair of Su-27 seconds spiral down, the tight nose-to-nose gun kill. When the screen showed the last fighter clipping the canyon wall, there was a beat of silence before the ground support segment rolled. Lawson finally spoke. "You didn't just win an unwinnable engagement, you dictated it. They were reacting to you." Cassandra shrugged once. "They underestimated what a helicopter can do if it stops playing by the manual." An intel major leaned forward. "Where did you learn those approach angles? That low to high against the pincer?" From someone who believed that altitude and speed are advantages only if the enemy agrees to fight where you want them to, she said. The questions kept coming, about terrain masking, about her choice to keep guns silent until the first surprise shot, about integrating ground support into air combat without a formal joint fires plan. She answered each without flourish, careful to credit Mercer for weapon management and Falcon 7 for disciplined movement under pressure. When the debrief wrapped, Ortega dismissed the others but gestured for her to stay. "Command's watching this," he said once the room had cleared. "You've just proven something we've only gamed in theory, that a rotorcraft can stand toe-to-toe with fighters under the right conditions. That's going to change doctrine, and change draws eyes." She knew what that meant. Scrutiny, offers, maybe assignments that never saw the light of public record. For now, there was maintenance to sign off, reports to file, and a crew chief already asking how many rounds were expended versus confirmed hits. She left the ready room with Mercer beside her, the two of them crossing back into the hangar where the Apache sat under arc lights. The airframe still carried the streaks of sandblast and cordite, each mark a fragment of the day's work. "You think they'll keep her in rotation?" Mercer asked, patting the fuselage. "She's earned it," Cassandra said, "but after today they might want her somewhere different." He gave her a sidelong glance. "And you?" "I go where I'm told. But I don't forget why I'm flying." The sound of approaching boots cut off the conversation. Ortega had returned, a folder in his hand. He handed it to her without preamble. Inside was a single sheet with orders, temporary reassignment to an undisclosed location, reporting in 48 hours. No details, just coordinates, a code name, and a list of authorized gear. "This is related to what you did today," Ortega said. "They want you to run a series of trials. Air-to-air tactics for attack aviation, not simulations. Live exercises, live pilots. You'll be working with crews pulled from across the service. It's experimental, classified, and if you agree to it, you'll have the resources to refine what you've been doing in the field." Cassandra closed the folder. "And if I don't, you go back to rotation, maybe see combat again in a year, maybe never. But what you've got in your head right now, it stays yours." She didn't need the full 2 days to decide. She gave a single nod. "I'll take it." Ortega's expression shifted just enough to show approval. "Then get some rest. You'll need it." That night, in the barracks, Cassandra lay awake longer than she meant to, the ceiling fan turning slowly overhead. Her mind replayed the day not as a single, uninterrupted film, but as flashes. The moment the first contact pinged the radar, the sharp intake of breath when the MiG committed to its run, the flicker of panic in an enemy voice after the third kill, and somewhere under it all, the steady undercurrent of her father's voice from years ago, teaching her to see airspace not as a flat sheet, but as a shifting puzzle of volumes and timing. She finally slept, knowing that whatever came next would not be ordinary. By morning, the Apache was already on a maintenance stand, panels open, crews moving like a practice swarm. Mercer had been pulled into an after-action review with weapons techs. She signed off the last of her reports, packed her kit, and walked once more past the flight line. 2 Sabre Company soldiers were there, their uniforms still streaked with yesterday's dust. They spotted her, crossed the tarmac without hesitation, and stopped just shy of arm's reach. "You're the reason we're here," one of them said, simply nothing else to add. She nodded once, accepting without embellishment. Then she shouldered her bag, feeling the weight not just of her gear, but of the day that had set the next part of her career in motion. The transport waiting at the far end of the strip had its engines running, back ramp down. Cassandra climbed aboard, the heat of the metal ramp seeping through her boots. As the hatch closed and the cabin filled with the deep thrum of takeoff, she glanced out the small side window. The base shrank away, the hangars becoming specks against the endless spread of desert. Whatever waited at the coordinates in that folder, she knew it wouldn't be routine. And that was fine. Routine had never been the point. The transport's interior was dim except for a strip of pale light along the ceiling. Cassandra sat opposite 2 silent crewmen in flight helmets, their visors down, their body language giving away nothing about their destination. The thrum of the engines settled into a low hypnotic rhythm. Out the small porthole to her right, the desert gave way to a jagged coastline, sunlight scattering off the water like broken glass. When the landing ramp finally lowered, the air that rushed in was cooler, salted. They had touched down on an island airfield, the kind that didn't appear on standard navigation charts. Low, angular hangars hugged the tarmac, painted in weather-worn grey. Beyond them, the sea glittered under a thin haze, and the faint outline of another coastline lay far on the horizon. A man in an olive flight suit approached as she stepped onto the apron. He had the lean build of a career aviator and the posture of someone who had been giving orders for a long time. The patch on his shoulder bore only a single black emblem, no unit name, no rank. "Major Holt?" His voice was low and matter-of-fact. "Captain," she corrected automatically. "Not anymore," he said, handing her a sealed envelope. "Your promotion paperwork was processed en route. Welcome to Task Group Indigo." Inside the main hangar, she was introduced to a handful of pilots and gunners, each with a file-thin biography and a reputation that had clearly preceded them. There were Marines who'd flown in tight coastal corridors, Army aviators who'd done insertion runs into triple canopy jungle, and a single Air Force exchange officer with a background in aggressor training. Every one of them looked at her with the frank curiosity of professionals sizing up a peer they'd heard about but never met. The briefing room was bare, a single long table, a projector, and a wall map of overlapping air defense rings. The man in the flight suit, now introduced as Commander Rain, took them through the mission of the unit. "You're here to develop and validate rotary wing air combat tactics against peer-level threats," he said. "We're not talking theory. We're flying against real aircraft, manned by pilots trained to beat you. The only safety net is the rule that says no one leaves the exercise area without clearance." Cassandra glanced at the map again. The exercise box was vast, stretching from open sea into a slice of rugged mainland terrain. There were marked denial zones where simulated surface-to-air batteries would be placed. The rest was an unpredictable chessboard. For the first week, she flew observation, watching how the other teams approached scenarios, how they used cover, how they baited fast movers into overshooting. The simulated kills and losses were tracked in real time, each engagement reviewed in detail afterward. She kept her own notes, comparing the patterns to the fights she'd lived through. On the 5th day, Rain called her into his office. The walls were bare except for a single photograph of a Sea King hovering over a storm-lashed frigate. "You've been quiet," he said. "I've been listening. And?" Too many of these engagements start with us reacting to their terms. We need to flip the sequence, force them to commit where their advantages shrink. He leaned back slightly. You're going to get your chance. Tomorrow, you'll lead in a two-ship element. Your wing will be Lieutenant Sharma. You'll be up against a 3-fighter Red Air team. They know you're coming. They've seen the footage. Cassandra understood the subtext. They'd be hunting her specifically. The next morning, the exercise began with the kind of deceptive calm she'd learned to distrust. Her Apache and Sharmas moved low over the sea, rotors thumping in unison. The horizon was clear, the radio silent except for the occasional control check. She stayed just below radar horizon, using the swell and the curvature to mask their path. When they turned inland, the terrain shifted to rolling hills and deep ravines. That was where she wanted them, places where speed could become a liability. The first radar blip appeared at high altitude, angling down. She keyed the wing frequency. Sharma, split low and west. Make them pick. The fighters committed to her vector, 2 breaking off to shadow her, while the 3rd tried to flank. She let them think they were closing in, holding course just long enough for them to build confidence. Then, with a quick pedal turn, she dropped into a ravine, hugging the shadowed wall. The lead fighter overshot, pulling up hard to avoid smashing into the ridge. The moment his profile crossed her nose, she tagged him with a simulated stinger shot. The kill tone in her headset was oddly satisfying, even in a mock fight. Sharma's voice came over the net. "One's pressing me, other is climbing. I'm on the climber," Cassandra said, using the cover of a winding gulch to mask her angle. She popped up just as the fighter leveled out, closing his arc to avoid the simulated ground fire zone. The launch tone chirped again, and another red icon on her display went black. The last fighter realized too late he was now the hunted. Cassandra and Sharma bracketed him, one from below, one from the flank. He tried to dive out, but the narrow canyon he'd chosen tightened faster than his turn radius allowed. The exercise controllers called the 3rd kill before he hit the imaginary wall. When they landed back at the island, Rain was waiting on the apron. His expression didn't shift much, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, approval tempered by calculation. "That's the first time Red Air's lost all aircraft in a single run this cycle," he said. "You just wrote the debrief agenda for the week." In the after-action session, Cassandra walked the room through her decisions, not just the shots, but the positioning, the control of engagement geometry, the forcing of overshoots. She emphasized the same principle her father had drilled into her: make them fight where their training works against them. By the end of the week, her role shifted from participant to instructor for specific modules. She found herself demonstrating brake turns against radar locks, teaching gunners how to time bursts for psychological effect as much as damage simulation, and, most importantly, convincing other crews that waiting for the perfect shot often meant never taking one. The work was relentless, the hours long, but it had a focus that made fatigue an afterthought. Out over the water or deep in the mainland's cut terrain, she could feel the envelope of what was possible stretch with each trial, and behind it all was the quiet awareness that these weren't just games. Somewhere eventually, what they were refining here would be tested where the stakes were not measured in simulated points. Late one evening, as she reviewed footage alone in the darkened briefing room, Rain stopped by. He didn't sit, just rested one hand on the back of a chair. "They're noticing," he said. "Not just here, outside this program. What you did in the desert wasn't a fluke, and you're proving it in controlled conditions. The question is how far you're willing to take this." Cassandra met his gaze. "As far as it needs to go." He nodded once, as if that was the answer he'd been expecting all along. The wind over the training range carried the smell of rain, even though the clouds were still miles to the west. Cassandra stood beside her Apache on the apron, the rotor blades hanging silent above like poised sabers. Around her, ground crews made final checks, their movements brisk but precise, the kind of tempo that meant something unusual was on the schedule. Rain approached with a folded map and a look that made the air feel heavier. "We're going off script today," he said. "Red Air has been given permission to operate beyond the normal boundary lines. They've also been told to use unrestricted tactics. This is as close to combat as the exercise gets." She scanned the map, overlapping arcs marked in red, simulating integrated air defenses. The engagement zone stretched into complex terrain inland, dotted with valleys, ridgelines, and pockets of simulated SAM coverage. "What's the objective?" she asked. "Escort an electronic warfare convoy from Point Echo to Point Lima. They'll be targeted as soon as they move. You keep them alive for 30 minutes. It was a difficult assignment: protect slow, vulnerable vehicles while enemy fighters had full maneuver freedom and the benefit of ground-based simulated threats. It was also exactly the kind of challenge she'd been shaping her tactics for. She climbed into the cockpit, Mercer already strapped in up front. "Convoy's going to be a magnet," he said. "That's the point," she replied, pulling on her helmet. The startup sequence was muscle memory: switches, systems, the growl of turbines feeding life into the rotors. Within minutes they were airborne, shadowing the convoy as it rolled out from Echo. From above, the trucks looked fragile, their painted tarps and mounted antenna arrays making them obvious targets. The first radar contact appeared sooner than expected, a pair of simulated Su-35 seconds sweeping in from high altitude, their icons climbing fast on her display. Cassandra keyed the convoy net. "You'll have fast movers overhead in 60 seconds. Stay en route. We'll handle the air picture." Mercer armed a pair of stingers. "They're splitting already. One high, one low." "Low is mine," Cassandra said, banking into the rising terrain. She hugged the contour of a ridge, letting the fighter drop into pursuit, its pilot likely expecting her to dive away. Instead, she climbed sharply into the turn, forcing him into a vertical overshoot. Before he could recover, she'd cued the stinger and launched. The simulated kill tone confirmed the hit. "High's breaking off," Mercer reported. "Let him go," she said. "He'll be back with friends." They regained position over the convoy just as the first ground threat activated, an exercise SAM site buried somewhere on the eastern slope. A shrill tone warned of a lock. Cassandra dumped flares, broke line of sight with a quick lateral dash, and slid back in. The simulated missile missed by a wide margin, but it was a reminder this wasn't a clean fight. Two more fighters entered the zone, both coming in low this time. Cassandra coordinated with Sharma, who was flying a second Apache on the mission's flank. They used the convoy as bait, pulling the fighters into a feigned bracket before snapping out from opposite sides of a hill. The pincer caught one in a crossfire. Sharma took the kill, and Cassandra drove the other into a rising slope where his escape route narrowed. "Fox 2!" she called, sending another stinger after him. The icon blinked out on the scope. "Convoy's still moving," Mercer confirmed. The simulated weather closed in. Controllers had pumped dense ground clutter into their radar feeds, mimicking heavy rain squalls. Visual flying took over. The convoy's dust plume became their anchor point, and every time it disappeared behind a ridge, her pulse ticked higher. Then came the hardest push yet: 3 enemy aircraft at once, coordinated, entering from different quadrants. The convoy was in open terrain now, nowhere to hide. "Sharma, take the south contact. I've got north and east," Cassandra ordered. The eastern fighter arrived first, using the sun to mask his approach. Cassandra rolled into the glare, forcing him to adjust, and in that fraction of a second, Mercer locked and launched. Simulated hit. The northern contact dived straight for the convoy. Cassandra cut across his line, releasing a short burst from the chain gun to disrupt his run, then followed with a missile lock as he pulled away. Another hit tone filled her headset. Static buzzed on the net. Sharma's voice came through, strained but steady. South Bandit splashed. 1 more minute on the clock. Cassandra swept the horizon. Nothing on radar, nothing in the glass. Either Red Air was out of position or they were planning a last-second strike. She didn't relax. The final push came in the last 30 seconds. A single fighter at treetop level, screaming in from the west. She dove to meet him head-on, the Apache bucking slightly in the turbulence. It was a game of nerve. Who would blink first, break off? Neither did. At the last instant, she fired, the simulated impact registering just before the two aircraft passed each other in a blur of speed and rotor wash. She banked hard, came back around, and saw the convoy's lead vehicle cross the virtual finish point into Lima. "Mission complete," the controller's voice announced over the common net. Back on the apron, the crews clustered again, their earlier reserve replaced by open respect. Rain gave her a brief nod, the kind that said more than a speech. "Not a single convoy asset lost," he told her later in the debrief. "You didn't just protect them, you controlled the engagement every step." For Cassandra, the victory wasn't in the scoreboard. It was in knowing that the tactics she'd once used alone in a desert canyon could be scaled, shared, and taught to others, and that the next time it wasn't an exercise, those 30 minutes could mean the difference between survival and loss. The debrief room was quieter than usual, the air carrying the hum of the projectors and the faint scent of jet fuel drifting in from the hangar. Cassandra sat at the head of the long table, not by choice, but because Rain had motioned her there. The screen behind her cycled through replay footage of the day's engagement. Missile trails, cannon bursts, and the convoy's slow crawl across hostile ground. Every seat was taken. Pilots, gunners, sensor operators, and a handful of senior observers lined the walls. None of them spoke until the final kill tone from the last pass echoed through the playback. Then Rain stepped forward, remote in hand, and froze the frame on the convoy crossing into Lima. "No losses," he said, his voice calm but carrying. Under unrestricted opposition, with overlapping simulated SAM coverage and 3 separate coordinated fighter pushes, the convoy made it intact. That's not luck, that's control. He turned toward Cassandra. "Major Holt, walk them through how you saw it." She stood, every eye following her as she moved to the screen. "We started by shaping the engagement space. Sharma and I stayed low to keep Red Air guessing which side we'd commit to, forcing them to split their attention. Each kill was less about the shot and more about removing a piece of their plan. By the last push, they were improvising instead of executing." An older Marine aviator raised a hand. "That head-on with the last fighter. Why not break early and reposition?" "Because he expected me to," Cassandra said. "Holding course made him adjust first, and in that window, I got the shot." There was a murmur of agreement around the table. Rain let it settle before clicking the projector off. "We'll incorporate those principles into next week's scenarios. For now, Major Holt, you're on rotation as lead instructor for Red Air counter-tactics." It wasn't applause she heard in the room. It was something better. Acceptance. After the session, Cassandra stepped out into the corridor where the low evening lights slanted through narrow windows, painting the floor in gold and shadow. Mercer was waiting, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Major Holt," he said, as if trying the title on for size. She shook her head. "Still getting used to that." "Get used to this too," he said, handing her a folded sheet of paper. It was an official commendation, signed by the exercise's Oversight Command, for exceptional performance in multi-domain aerial combat under simulated high-threat conditions. She read it once, then slipped it into her flight suit pocket. "It's just paper. What matters is whether what we did here gets out where it's needed." "It will," Mercer said, his tone certain. That night, Rain found her in the hangar, sitting on the step of the Apache's skid with her helmet beside her. The aircraft loomed above, its frame catching the last of the daylight. "They're asking for you," Rain said without preamble. "Who's they?" "You'll find out." Let's just say higher command wants you in front of people who decide how the next decade of tactics gets written." Cassandra didn't answer right away. Her eyes traced the worn rivets along the Apache's fuselage, each one a reminder of hours flown in places where nothing was guaranteed. "If they're looking for a speech, they'll be disappointed. I'd rather be in the seat than at a podium." "They're not looking for speeches," Rain said. "They're looking for proof. You are the proof." 2 days later, she found herself on a mainland airbase she'd never visited, walking into a briefing hall lined with flags and insignia from multiple branches. Senior officers filled the front rows. On the screen was a still frame from her desert mission, the moment the first MiG erupted into fire. The presenter, an Air Force colonel, introduced her simply, "Major Cassandra Holt, U.S. Army Aviation. Today she'll explain why you should rethink what a helicopter can do in a fight you thought belonged only to fixed wing." She spoke for 20 minutes, walking them through the decisions, the risks, and the mindset that had carried from that canyon fight into the convoy escort. There was no bravado, no theatrics, just the same precision she used in the cockpit. When she finished, the questions came fast, some skeptical, others already thinking about implementation. One admiral leaned forward. "Major, if you had the authority, how would you train the next generation for this kind of engagement?" "I'd start by changing the first thing they're taught," Cassandra said. "Don't tell them what they can't do with their aircraft. Show them how to use it in ways the enemy won't expect. Confidence comes from preparation, not assumption." When it was over, the applause was brief but genuine. A few approached her afterward, pilots from different branches, shaking her hand, some quietly admitting they'd dismissed the idea until they saw it in her footage. Back at the island base that evening, she returned to her routine, debriefing crews, running sims, flying the training sorties. The work felt the same, but the air around her had changed. People looked to her not just for the next move in an exercise, but for a new way of thinking. One night, as she closed out the hangar, Mercer caught her before she left. "Got a message from Falcon 7, he said. "They're back stateside. Sent word they'll raise a glass to you every year on that date." She smiled faintly. "I'll drink to that, once this tour's done." The following morning brought orders stamped with a classification code she hadn't seen before. The destination wasn't an island this time. It was back into operational theaters, this time leading a composite detachment designed to trial the tactics in live deployments. Rain met her on the pad as she pre-flighted. "It's not a farewell," he said. "It's the next phase." She glanced at the horizon, the first light touching the water in long silver strokes. "Then let's make sure the next phase counts." The rotors began to turn, building their steady cadence. As the aircraft lifted, the base dropped away beneath her. Ahead lay new airspace, new variables, and opponents who, if they were unlucky, might one day hear her voice over an open channel, calm, certain, and already one step ahead. The dust over the forward strip rose in lazy spirals, curling into the dawn air. Cassandra's Apache settled onto the makeshift pad, the heat shimmer from the exhaust bending the shapes of tents and antenna masts beyond. This was no exercise ground. The lines here were real, and so were the people depending on her. Her composite detachment had been operating in the region for 3 weeks, testing the air-to-air tactics against unpredictable opposition. Every sortie was a gamble, enemy patrols, hidden launchers, and weather that could turn from clear to treacherous in minutes. But each time the principles held. Control the geometry, dictate the pace, force the opponent to play in your arena. Today's mission, though, was different. Intelligence reported an armored column pushing through a mountain pass toward a friendly garrison. Fixed wing cover was hours away. Cassandra's unit was the only asset in range. The terrain was claustrophobic, sheer cliffs on both sides, narrow switchbacks, and nowhere for the enemy to disperse once inside. Her lead gunner, Sergeant Ing, studied the sat imagery on his kneeboard. If they've got air cover, it'll be fast and aggressive. Limited escape routes mean they'll try to flush us into the open. Then we'll give them a different problem, Cassandra replied, her tone calm but decisive. The approach to the pass was a winding descent along a dry riverbed. She kept the Apache low, the rotor tips skimming just above the walls, masking their radar signature in the terrain's folds. The convoy appeared as a line of faint heat blooms on her display, armored personnel carriers interspersed with flatbeds carrying supplies. Before she could make the first pass, the telltale ping of hostile radar lit up the threat display. A flight of 2 enemy fighters had entered the box, diving toward the pass from the north. Cassandra didn't hesitate. "Eng, mark the lead. I'll take the trailer." They broke formation, the Apache surging upward out of the canyon mouth like a predator from deep water. The trailing fighter committed to a gun run, confident the helicopter would peel away. Instead, Cassandra swung onto his vector, her angle cutting across his turn radius. The Stinger's lock tone was instant. The simulated kill signal flashed across her scope. The lead fighter pressed on, ignoring his partner's loss. NG tracked him through the gun sight, letting the pilot think he was clear before rolling into a tight corkscrew climb. When the shot came, it was point blank in the training sense, an unambiguous hit that took the second threat off the board. That left the convoy. Cassandra dropped back into the pass, moving ahead of the armored line. Her first Hellfire volley took the lead vehicle out of commission, blocking the rest in place. The sudden halt caused chaos in their formation, perfect for the garrison's artillery to exploit once she cleared the airspace. But the fight wasn't over. A new radar spike lit the scope. 4 more fighters, inbound from 2 directions. This time the numbers were worse, and the pass gave them no room to maneuver. She keyed the detachment net. Element 2, fall back to the southern ridge, cover the exit. NG and I will hold them here. The fighters split into pairs, one element trying to box her in from above, the other from the side. She used the only advantage the canyon offered, vertical terrain masking. Every time they committed to a run, she slipped behind a ridge, popped up in a place they didn't anticipate, and forced them into rushed corrections. 2 paid for it. One overshot into NG's sights, the other rolled straight into a hellfire that caught him mid-turn. The remaining pair tried to disengage, but Cassandra pressed, her rotor wash chasing them into open sky. She didn't need to finish them. Their retreat was enough. The pass was clear, and the convoy was trapped where ground forces could deal with it. By the time she set the Apache down back at the strip, the sun was high, painting the camp in stark light. Mechanics swarmed the aircraft, checking for stress damage from the maneuvers. NG climbed out, helmet under his arm, and simply said, "That was one for the book." In the command tent, a liaison officer relayed the report from the garrison. 0 enemy vehicles reached the perimeter. "Your unit's intervention saved the position without a single friendly loss." Later, when the detachment gathered around a battered table in the mess tent, Cassandra found herself the focus of every conversation. She listened more than she spoke, letting the others recount the fight in their own words. For some, it was the ambush in the pass. For others, it was the way she'd drawn the fighters into terrain they couldn't control. That evening, Rain's voice came over the secure line from the island base. "I've read the field reports. What you've done here seals it. These tactics aren't just viable, they're game-changing. Expect visitors. They'll want to see for themselves." Cassandra stood outside the tent after the call, the night air cool against her skin. The base was quiet except for the low hum of generators and the distant shuffle of sentries. She thought about the desert fight that had started it all, the training runs over the sea, the convoy escort. None of it had been about proving a point for its own sake. It had been about the people on the ground, the ones who couldn't just fly away when danger came. Somewhere in the dark she could hear the faint rhythmic beat of another helicopter approaching. It wasn't hers, but it carried the same promise: "If you call, we come." She allowed herself a small smile. The mission today would be debriefed, studied, maybe even replicated. But for her, the real victory was in the 6 pilots she'd trained over the past months, now flying with the same mindset, ready to take the fight on their own terms. And if the day came when the enemy once again laughed at the idea of a helicopter standing against fighters, she knew there would be more than one voice ready to answer on the open channel. Calm, certain, and already one move ahead. Some victories are measured in miles gained or targets destroyed. Cassandra Holt's were measured in lives saved, in battles ended before they began. From a lone fight in the desert to rewriting the rules of aerial warfare, she proved that limits exist only until someone dares to push past them. And somewhere out there, pilots she trained now carry that same resolve into the sky. This is Veteran Biker. Thank you for riding with us. Subscribe for more stories like this and share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in her seat? The conversation starts below.